Well, hello YouTube, it's me, Fortmaster, and welcome back to another film theory reaction, and yeah, it's another Marvel one. Should the MCU reboot? Which, I mean, at this point, that is a question, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, it might be a bad idea just because, I mean, you look at North American comics right now, and one of the reasons I've heard for why they're failing is because of the reboots. They reboot the universes like what it I think it was, I saw like an average of every like 10 to 15 years, which I can understand partially because as like the stories go on, I mean, obviously the characters get more powerful as new abilities and stuff appear, and it's like it gets to the point where you kind of have to reboot, otherwise, you know, the threats that they have to face are just getting like stupid and then just like too big and too strong to really take seriously at all. But on the other hand, you have the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which has been going on since, okay, I forget, when did the MCU actually start? Yeah, since like 2008. So that's literally 15 years worth of like in-world history. But at the same time, the MCU itself isn't looking that good at the moment. The joke that was going around was the advertisements for the Marvels was saying, oh, the #1 movie in the world, when the Marvels has had the worst opening box office in MCU history. Like I said, I pretty much dropped off of watching Marvel movies after Infinity War, because at that point I was just so burnt out. And then by the time I started feeling, oh, you know, maybe I could start getting back into these, then it just started being a thing where like virtually all the movies that were coming out were bad, and like each one had like 3 like series that you had to watch ahead of time to figure out what was even going on. As I've said before, pretty much at this point, like everything I know that's going on in the MCU is from like game theory or like comic books series or like sci-fi channels like on YouTube, where they talk about like what's happening in the MCU like news wise. But other than that, should it reboot or should they just fire all the writing staff and get new ones is the question. I guess you could think of that as a reboot in some way. So yeah, with all that being said, original video is linked in the description if you haven't seen it yet for some reason. Corner video will lead to my game theory reaction. And with all that out of the way, let's get this thing actually started then, shall we?
Marvel's in trouble. This untouchable titan of a franchise has fallen to its knees in recent years, and it's gotten people wondering, should the MCU just scrap it all and reboot? Well, today I have the answer, and that answer is us, these theory channels.
Of course, you replace the MCU with the TCU, the Theorist Cinematic Universe. Wait, actually, don't we kind of have that already with all these theory channels? Who needs the MCU, actually?
Marvel needs to run more like us. Settle in as we give Mickey Mouse a speedrun lesson on the art of running a content business.
Wonderful.
Hello Internet, welcome to Film Theory, where today it's time to show how a scrappy bunch of YouTubers are smarter than entertainment's biggest brand. So, I don't think it's a controversial take when I say that Marvel's really struggling right now. Box office returns and Disney Plus viewership are in the tank, and there's really no sign of it turning around. The recently concluded Loki premiered to 40% lower watch minutes and a fifth of the online chatter when compared to season 1. And that's pretty bad considering the show before that, Secret Invasion, had the second worst numbers of any MCU Disney Plus series. In fact, release after release after release has seen a decline in overall viewership for the MCU extensions happening over on Disney Plus. But what's more concerning are the films. Multiverse of Madness, disappointment. Love and Thunder, disappointment. Quantumania, huge disappointment. And while the numbers are still coming in as I write this, The Marvels is headed for the lowest opening of any MCU project ever. And that's including the Hulk movie from way back before this whole thing even got off the ground. Early data for The Marvels is comparing it to the performance of The Flash. Let's just say that you do not want to be compared to the box office performance of The Flash. In short, things are not looking so hot for this once untouchable franchise.
Actually, what was it? I remember, I forget who said it, but I remember somebody saying, just I think somewhat jokingly, but you could look into this seriously, that the studios are starting to panic because they're having to look for whatever the next big thing is, because super movies are starting to fail consistently.
And it's gotten a lot of people to start asking, is it time for the MCU to reboot? And really, is this even that surprising a question to ask? Quality of the output aside, the MCU is very long in the tooth at this point, especially when you're talking about a film franchise. Whether it's a soft reboot with a fresh creative team, a hard reboot where they start from scratch, or some mix of both, movie series don't go on this long without some sort of fresh coat of paint. Talks have even gotten so serious that rumors are now spreading that they're considering bringing both Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans back to reprise their roles in a desperate bid to bring audiences back to the franchise. But here's the thing.
How, though? Because one is dead, and two is really old and happily living with his wife. Granted, I mean, they're bringing in like the multiverse, so there's always, that could be the answer to the problem somehow. But, oh god, wait a second, I just realized, what's the number for the MCU and Marvel's like multiverse sort of thing? Jeez, okay, yeah, so the MCU is Earth 199,999, while the mainline comic book Earth is Earth 616. So if they do a reboot, they could very much say that the reboot takes place on Earth 200,000.
After looking deep into the problems that Marvel's facing right now, I'm convinced that a reboot would be the single worst idea that they could do at this point. So today, friends, I'm gonna be taking a deep, hard look at Marvel Studios and how they've been handling their cinematic universe, and then give them some advice on how they can right the ship. Because the answers that they're looking for right now are actually a lot closer than they expect. They're right here on this channel. A few months ago, I gave Disney a free consulting session on how our YouTube business can fix their movie business, and it looks like it's time for another session, covering a brand new slate of topics. Bob Iger, you and your shareholders might want to start taking notes, or you could always just invest those billions of dollars over here to a team who actually knows what they're doing. So grab your popcorns for this one, friends, because let's be honest, you're not going to be eating it in theaters watching the Marvels this weekend. And let's dunk on Disney just a little bit, shall we? So the issues that Marvel's facing
very much
right now
like
can
dunking
really
on
boil down
Disney
into three main buckets: person centricity, programming cadence, and audience trust. So let's just take them point by point and see where we can fix things, shall we? Main problem number one, person centricity. Basically what this means is that there's one person in the company who is way too important for the business to be growing sustainably. You see, despite some corporate meddling here and there, the way Marvel Studios is operated has come down to what Kevin Feige decides is best. It's either his way or the highway, with all the decisions ultimately funneling up to him. And this is true at all points in Marvel's production. Several writers and directors like Edgar Wright and Scott Derrickson left their projects due to creative differences with Feige. Other directors like Neil DaCosta admitted that they didn't have any creative control over their work. All of this was an intentional structural decision. Feige was frustrated by the lack of control that Marvel had over their projects pre-MCU, quoted as saying, "We suggested, but they didn't listen. We didn't have control. I hated that." And you know what? For a while, this structure worked. There are a lot of advantages to this sort of arrangement. When you have a figurehead like this, you have a consistent guiding force. The person gathers a lot of institutional knowledge and makes sure that everything's focused in the right direction because it's their sole creative decision. They and the brand are united as one, which makes sure that everything feels cohesive.
Which that in itself, again, is an accomplishment. I mean, how many of the movies, how many Marvel movies before? Because I kind of say the good MCU like finished around Infinity War, and like how many of the movies before Infinity War were flops? Like each one was an absolute staple, and that everybody had to see. But then it starts getting to the point where you have this like, I don't know what you call this thing that is the MCU. It's getting so big and so bloated. There are so many moving parts and so many different storylines, especially because of, again, all of the streaming shows they're making simultaneously. I can totally see that where they're having to do the whole thing like like Matt talked about in his previous Disney theory he was talking about, where they're having to shovel out more without fine-tuning it and actually making it work. Like, what was it? I think in this current phase of the MCU, if I remember what Matt Pat said correctly, there's more watch minutes of footage than there were in the first two phases combined.
The MCU was running at a much smaller scale, just a couple films a year all leading to a giant crossover. Having that sort of singular vision worked. And when you think about it, this is actually the same model that most YouTube businesses start off with. There's one central figurehead that's the centerpiece of the brand, the one responsible for making all the decisions. For Mr. Beast, it's Jimmy. For Mythical, it's Rhett and Link. For MKBHD, that's Marquez. And for all of us here at Theorist, it's me. And oftentimes, everything gets funneled up through the company to these central figures who then is responsible for making the decisions. And just like with Kevin Feige, there's a lot of efficiency in that process because these people know their brand, they know the content, they know their community better than anyone else. Oh, this worked really well for our thumbnails 2 years ago. People didn't really care for the episodes when we scripted it this way. Oh, this is the best way to do brand deals, trust me. I've been doing it for 5 years, and we've already done an episode like this. We just did it, 10 years ago. But as you might imagine, there are a lot of negatives when you're working with that sort of structure. Things can become stagnant without other fresh voices coming in with new ideas.
Well, stagnancy, yeah, I didn't even think of that. But two, also just, again, you have a single point of failure. I mean, let's just say, like, for heaven forbids, he died. I would guarantee that the entire MCU it would either be the best or worst thing for the MCU, because you have this utter, like, complete right-hand turn or left-hand turn, whichever turn it is, that could happen because you're all of a sudden taking out the one most important piece of the puzzle and swapping it out with something else.
And as the company grows, that person's time becomes more and more split, and quality starts to dip without some sort of strong guiding hand at the helm. This is where I see Marvel right now. This is a stat I've pointed to a couple times in the past, but I'm just gonna bring it up again here because it's mind-boggling. If you look at the number of minutes of content released in the MCU, there's just too much. Phase 4 had a staggering 3,500 minutes spread across 2 years, mostly thanks to the introduction of Disney+. That is more than phases 1 to 3 combined. And
never mind, I was wrong. It was the first 3.
Kevin Feige is losing control. Storylines feel disjointed, and it's suddenly difficult for characters to feel consistent between all the different projects. The first time viewers felt this was with Wanda going complete villain from WandaVision to Doctor Strange. Even Elizabeth Olsen wasn't a fan of this, and revealed that it happened because the writers of WandaVision were given no information about Multiverse of Madness. The same thing just happened with Nick Fury's character between Secret Invasion and the Marvels. As film analyst Dan Murrell actually said in his recent review,
I was thinking, this has to be a variant of the Nick Fury that was just in Secret Invasion. His characterization is almost insultingly 180 degrees from the character that we just saw on that Disney Plus series.
All in all, this seems to be a failure of business structure. Information isn't being properly shared across the people making the films and shows. In the past, Kevin Feige would have been the guy passing that information along, but now more and more cracks in information are starting to show up as more and more projects are having to be juggled. But thankfully, there are ways to mitigate this issue. Main thing I recommend, break your organization down into units, each with a leader who can keep it running smoothly. Well, it's not really my place to speak about other YouTube business models. I can give you a peek behind the curtain here at Theorist. You see,
everything's on fire.
The same issue after we launched Food Theory. Between game theory, film theory, food theory, and GT Live, writing and overseeing every single project just wasn't possible for me to do alone anymore. What we ended up doing was breaking the company down into units, one for each channel, with a creative director in charge of production and scripting, as well as managing any sort of crossover events. That's why you've seen people like Lee, Tom, Amy, and Santi popping up more and more. They're the ones driving a lot of the creative forward, helping choose programming, making sure information and production quality is at the same level and ideally higher than it was when I was doing everything solo. Because honestly, it's their full-time job to keep track of all this, to be experts in all this and the things that we're talking about. It helps us raise the bar and do more without spreading ourselves too thin.
Okay, so this is one thing I have to say about just like how big like some YouTube channels are and can be. Like, obviously we see how big like Mr. Beast and all of his things get, but specifically talking about all the theory channels here, you have 5 channels that are so successful that with the combination of ad revenue and like merch and like sponsorships and stuff like that, they are able to have at the very minimum 4 people whose full-time job is just to run the channel for Pat instead. Granted, it's like, it is absolutely phenomenal. Just granted, I don't know how much they make or if like Pat gives them benefits or stuff like that. I would imagine he does, because something like that was happening. Somebody would probably squeal, but neither here nor there. But still, it's it gets to me how big some of these channels get when, like, especially with like Game Theory, where pretty much the only person you see over a majority of the videos is just MatPat. It takes, you forget sometimes that he has a team of people, and in actuality 4 different teams of people whose job it is to help him create content. It is phenomenal when you remember stuff like that.
Also allows us to tackle more big projects for each channel, like a fashion show on Style Theory, or a travel show on Food Theory, or Season 2 of Game Lab over on Game Theory, because now each channel is
making a
its
Season
own
2, really?
living, breathing entity, a channel all its own with its own brain in the mode of a creative director, rather than me having to divide my limited time and resources like some sort of parent trying to decide which child gets my attention next. It also lets us start new initiatives much more easily, like social media and podcasts. Speaking of, we actually did just launch an audio podcast version of Film Theory over on Spotify. If you want to listen to Film Theory on the go, that right there, that is the best place to do it. We have a ton of our episodes already up there, including some of our Marvel theories like Thanos was right, or whether Thanos was worthy. Honestly, I'm just a fan of Thanos over here. We also have some certified Film Theory classics in there, like our Disney death count. Which Disney movie has the highest death toll? Listen to that one and you'll find out. Regardless, if you're an audio listener and want some Film Theory hits to have on the go, check out the audio version of Film Theory over on Spotify. Link is down in the description. Anyway, this is exactly what Marvel needs to do as a good first step towards writing their ship. Break things down into more manageable sections. Marvel Street Level, Marvel Cosmic, Marvel Magic and Horror, whatever it is. Each with a trusted producer keeping tabs on those characters and then communicating with the other producers when those characters get shared. Then all of that can get run up the chain to Feige for final approval, or any sort of specific notes that he might have. Interestingly, this is actually something that Marvel flirted with in the past and seemed to be doing again. Before they fired him, James Gunn was set up to be the guy in charge of the cosmic side of Marvel Studios. That never happened. It seems
he moved over to DC.
As the company just launched a new Marvel Spotlight banner meant to focus on street-level characters that don't need a bunch of homework to understand. No word yet on if there's a specific producer shepherding Spotlight to get some of that work off Feige's plate, but hey, it's a start. In the short term, it might seem like a reboot could fix this problem. Yeah, completely wiping the slate clean would make things much more approachable for fans and let you start fresh with characterization. You suddenly don't have to worry about whether or not a joke Captain America makes in movie 25 lines up with his opinions from movie 3 15 years ago. But this is a short-term solution that still results in the same issues down the road if the core structural company-wide problems aren't addressed. So in this case, I don't think a reboot would actually help all that much. But this then leads nicely into problem bucket number 2, your programming cadence. When you're planning out a schedule for any sort of entertainment nowadays, whether it's a YouTube channel or the MCU, you need to be aware of what you're releasing and in what order. Again, a YouTube channel. The last thing that you want is to spam your audience with a bunch of content that they're not going to be interested in. If you're subscribed to this channel for Film Theory, which generally comes out once a week and has itself a very specific style, if I then start uploading a bunch of vlogs about my life, you're gonna be pretty mad, right? Or maybe even less extreme, if I start uploading movie reviews, or Easter egg breakdowns, or interviews with celebrities. Sure, some of you might like some of those because it's still film related, but it's not the show that you signed up for. I'm spamming most of your feeds with stuff that isn't gonna be interesting to you, and bit by bit, you're gonna start checking in on us less and less frequently.
I can kind of relate to that, because I would have to say the biggest sort of regular viewership creator on my channel is my reactions to Game and Film Theory.
Within Film Theory itself, that's why we have to be so careful about episode selection. We like to cover everything on this channel, whether it's a big blockbuster film in cinemas to an undiscovered indie series on YouTube.
Oh, yeah,
obviously not everyone who watches a Paw Patrol video are then going to hop on over to our videos on the back rooms. So within our programming, we have to be careful of delivering
They're not like me.
That you're most excited about, while also interspersing in things that we think are cool and might end up being your new favorite franchise that we cover. This tricky balancing act of programming is actually why it's so hard to find variety channels on YouTube anymore. It's easiest to just have one channel do one format on one specific thing, or have one person be the connective thread on each and every video all the time, because that's what works easiest for audiences, and also that's what works for the algorithms. And hey, Marvel used to be the king of programming. When Guardians of the Galaxy was first announced, people thought it was going to be Marvel's first flop, and for good reason. On paper, it should have been an absolute failure. They were a bunch of D-listers, and they were weird, but Marvel intelligently worked them into their schedule between a Captain America movie and an Avengers movie. That way it could soft soften any bad performance blow. Couple that with a solid script, and you know what? That movie was a hit, and now everyone loves the Guardians. Captain Marvel, roughly the same deal. A new character that they hope to do big things with moving forward, getting sandwiched between two of the biggest movies of all time. And financially, it worked, with a fairly mediocre origin movie delivering $1 billion box office smash and introducing a recognizable, if not all that beloved, new character into the roster. And if
I mean, admittedly, I do think a bunch of that wasn't so much that she was sandwiched between them, but more so that we were told that watching the movie would be necessary for the second half of Endgame.
If you look at the film output of Phase 4 on paper, it looked strong. Riding off bangers like Endgame and Spider-Man at the end of Phase 3, we got Black Widow, Shang-Chi, and the Eternals. All a little bit risky, but hey, you're coming off of $2 billion hits, so it gives you a couple movies to experiment. And guess what? Shang-Chi worked fairly well.
Wait, did the Black Widow movie ever actually come out?
Work into their programming slate. And then right after that, they had Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Thor, Black Panther, 4 huge franchises, all one after the other to rebuild momentum after a relatively slow period. Except Marvel forgot one thing. Those movies weren't the only part of the conversation anymore. With the addition of Disney Plus, the films became a much smaller part of the cultural conversation. Instead of all those big names happening in succession back to back to back to back, those films were now interspersed between a ton of smaller shows. All of a sudden, your heavy hitters aren't getting the room to breathe. And as for the quality of those Disney Plus shows, well, for every certified hit like Loki, you had disappointments like She-Hulk and Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
You've got to do better, Senator.
Is this working for you?
No.
But what's worse is because the Disney Plus shows are released over time instead of all at once, the conversation around them was stretched out for weeks. While the films get a flash in the pan discussion right after release, the shows, they're in the zeitgeist for months. Again, looking at the YouTube comparison, that would be like subscribing to this channel for Film Theory, giving you a medium-length, thoughtfully researched video every week, and us instead spamming your feed with shorter, cheaper, less well-written content every day. Some made for you, and lots of it not, until you just eventually stop watching the channel altogether. For Marvel, a reboot here is not gonna solve the problem. If you go into a new rebooted universe and still program this poorly, well, you're still gonna spam your viewers. You need to be more discerning with who you're giving these Disney Plus shows to, while also working on their overall quality. Characters like Loki, Wanda, Falcon, sure, it potentially makes sense to give these characters shows. They've been built up as side characters across the films. But does She-Hulk need a $25 million per episode series? Does it make sense to give Ms. Marvel her show before her debut in a feature film? Did Nick Fury need an ultimately pointless side quest? No, Marvel just started making everything rather than really focusing on creating the stories that needed to be told. Which leads me then to problem bucket number 3, audience trust. Fulfilling on the promise that
I mean, this one's kind of self-explanatory. I mean, it's with YouTube. Basically, any like media, well, any company really, if you do a good enough job over a long enough time, you gain, you know, customers' trust. You know, that's kind of self-explanatory. And if you mess up, that costs you some of that trust. And if you keep messing up, it keeps taking more and more and more trust. And eventually, you use up that capital. And it takes a long time to get it back once it's been depleted.
make to your viewers. Managing a YouTube channel is a lot like having a bank account. With each video I do, I'm trying to put a deposit into this bank of trust with you, the viewer. I make a video you like, well, you trust me a little bit more to deliver more things that you like, and as a result, you trust my judgment a bit more. Over years, I've hopefully been able to build a big deposit with you guys, but just like with a bank account, you can also make withdrawals. Every time I ask you to do something, that's a withdrawal. Try a video on a brand new franchise that you've never heard of?
Local 58, yeah.
Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Small withdrawal. Go subscribe to Style Theory, or go over to Spotify to check out Film Theory's new channel over there, or buy some merch, or watch our premium show on TV, which doesn't exist yet, but who knows, maybe one day. Well, all of those are big withdrawals, because I'm asking for a lot of your faith and trust to do something out of the ordinary. For any smart content creator, your job is to maintain that balance of trust. Keep putting in deposits of trust over a long period of time, and make sure that you never overdraw your account, because that's when the audience stops investing. And the biggest draw that you can possibly make on that account is asking people to commit to something that you then give up on. We waited literal years to launch Food and Style Theory because we wanted to make sure that we had the systems in place to deliver those channels consistently forever. The last thing we wanted was to launch something only to then let it die, leaving you guys with nothing but a broken promise, a betrayal of your trust.
Oh no, that's the thing, like, it would take me some time to think, but I could probably think of a couple of like channels that I, found a video of on YouTube and thought I was like, oh man, this looks really cool. I want to see more. And I go to the channel to look at the back catalog to see how much more of the stuff there is. And the channel has been inactive for like 3 years Or even then, there's been a couple of times where you have YouTubers that just they either stop or massively slow down their output. Sometimes it's because, you know, they move on to other things, but other times it's because, you know, they worked themselves too hard initially, and then they have to take these extended breaks to, like, you know, rebuild their faculty so they don't crack. But in the meantime, they never reach, they never get back to what would really be like a suitable level. Like they take like absurdly long. Like I can imagine, like, what is it? There's one channel I used to watch for like old school anime reviews called Bennett the Sage. He used to be a part of Channel Awesome before that broke apart, you know, with the Nostalgia Critic. And he used to have, you know, like, I think it was like at least every other week at the least of, you know, like watching these like really bad, like really corny, sometimes like these old like anime OVAs from like the 80s and stuff. But I'd say in like the last 2 years, he's put out a lot less, but because, like, you know, stuff has gone underway. I think he was getting married, and their honeymoon was going to be in Italy or something. So, but at the same time, like, I miss his stuff. I really do. And then another like former Channel Awesome guy, Spoonie. If you've ever heard of Spoonie, I remember loving him as a kid. But the thing is, I only discovered him like a bit before he fell off completely. I think he still streams on YouTube from time to time, but like otherwise his channel is like virtually dead. Like I remember finding him so funny. I think I actually used one of his jokes in one of my videos before. It was in one of my reactions to an Overly Sarcastic Productions trope talk about betrayal, and I think like 3 times in the video I have one of Spoonie's things where he's screaming betrayal, like zoom across the screen whenever the word betrayal is said in the video itself, just because, you know, when I was watching it, that was the first thing I thought of, and I thought it was funny, so I wanted to use it.
Back in the day, this is what set the MCU apart from the other attempted cinematic universes. When Nick Fury stepped out of the shadows and told Iron Man about the Avengers Initiative, we knew that we were going to be getting that big crossover. When Thanos put on the gauntlet and said,
"Fine,
I'll do it myself.
I'll do it myself."
we knew that it was going to pay off, and relatively soon. Even small things like,
I can do this all day.
is it a positive trust? Because it shows an internal, consistent logic of character that rewards all the long-term fans of the franchise. But these days, because there's new Marvel content basically every single week, and it's all from such random corners of the MCU, there's been no follow-through with so many of the things that they've teased. That trust is broken. There are too many loose ends that have been left unresolved. There's a giant celestial in the ocean that literally no one cares about.
Oh God, I completely forgot that happened, right?
Had the entire world see an accelerated day-night cycle that's never mentioned again. The Young Avengers have been teased for so long that really, who even cares anymore? Team up or don't, I just don't care. Just move on. And that's just a fraction of the ones that come to mind. From small characters like the Black Knight to huge issues like how the multiverse feels like it functions differently in almost every new project, these things are breaks in the audience's trust that tells us, well, if Marvel didn't care enough to get it right,
why should we?
And even when they do explore the exciting concepts they introduce, it's underwhelming. I don't think anything epitomizes this more than the multiverse. Sure, some of it's been cool. We got glimpses of it with Loki and No Way Home, but most of it just didn't land. Remember the hype online when it looked like they were about to bring in Quicksilver from the Fox movies, and then the payoff was just a bad joke?
Ralph Boner?
Boner.
What If promised to be a bold, different take on all your favorite MCU heroes, and what we got were 30-minute chunks of less good versions of movies that we'd already seen. They sold Multiverse of Madness on this deep dive into weird worlds like the Paint universe, and what we got was a quick montage of 45 minutes in a world identical to the main MCU with the saturation turned up. This just isn't living up to the promise that they're giving us. The quality isn't there. It'd be like me hyping up our new apparel as the best stuff ever, only for you to get it, and then it be nothing more than just a run-of-the-mill t-shirt. That's why we put so much care into the stuff that we put out, because when you click on a video or buy a jacket or subscribe to a new channel, we want you to know that your trust hasn't been misplaced, that it's been worth it. And rebooting the MCU right now might be the single worst decision that they could possibly make.
Yeah, you just get rid of any little trust you have.
Harm than good, because it would basically tell us that everything that we've spent time waiting for has been for nothing. Were you excited to see Sam Wilson tackle what it means to be Captain America? For the next generation of heroes to finally take on the mantle of the Avengers? For Blade to fight some vampires? A reboot would basically say, say, yeah, too bad, and make you feel stupid for wanting those
Nope.
things in the first place. Instead, just like with the programming cadence, the solution here is to just reevaluate the slate of films and shows. Really double down on what people are actually excited about and explore those things to their fullest potential.
I'm not
instead of
really
dangling
excited for the
something new in
X-Men.
every post-credit scene like Keys distracting a dog. But here's the big twist. While I've been holding ourselves up as the model to follow here, I recognize you might be too proud, Marvel, to follow the advice of some lowly YouTuber. So you don't have to take my word for it. You can take a look much closer to home. Your own comics division. They can also tell you why rebooting would be a bad idea at this point.
What was
You
I
see,
saying at the
Marvel
beginning
has
of this?
tried rebooting before with the Ultimate Universe. In the early 90s, the comic industry collapsed, and Marvel in particular was hit hard, resulting in their bankruptcy. This is actually when they sold off a lot of their film rights just to stay afloat, and why we got movies like Blade, X-Men, Spider-Man, and Daredevil. Anyway, in an attempt to drum up excitement for the brand, modernize their characters, and offer brand new perspectives on the old lore, Marvel made a bold decision. They were going to start a second main line of comics that would run alongside their 616 universe, and they were calling it Ultimate Marvel. Basically, it was just them experimenting with rebooting the whole company. At the beginning, it ended up being one of Marvel's biggest success stories, with this universe's flagship book, The Ultimates, being the single most successful comic book of the year. But despite that initial burst of success, the Ultimate Universe quickly petered out, dwindling in sales until the entire line was eventually canceled and the universe destroyed in the Secret Wars event from the mid-2010s. The only part of it that lives on is Miles Morales, who was transferred over to the mainline Marvel Comics universe, which itself just continued to chug along the entire time and is still going to this very day. A reboot for the...
Actually, wait a second. That reminded me of something I've been wondering for a little bit now. Why is Miles Morales called Spider-Man? And I'm not saying that like, oh, why is you know, like all that, like some people would talk about on the internet. I mean, why is he called Spider-Man when there's already a Spider-Man in the universe he's in? I know originally he was the Spider-Man of the Ultimate Universe, and then he was brought in. But like, why didn't they give him a new name? Because well, for like one example, Spider-Gwen. I have no idea what's really going on with her, but I know for a time she was brought over into the mainline Spider-Man comics as a regular character, and they couldn't call her just Spider-Woman, but they called her Ghost Spider, because obviously her powers are still very similar to that of, you know, Spider-Man, but her costume's all white, so they gave her her own like original name. Why didn't they do the same thing with Miles? Why is he just another Spider-Man? That kind of devalues the original Spider-Man as well. I don't know. I mean, if anybody watching this knows the answer to that, I would very much like to hear the answer in the comments, because it's something I've been wondering for a while.
The MCU would be the YouTube equivalent of clickbait, or an unwarranted "we need to talk guys" video.
Oh,
Sure,
God,
people
no.
click and gets them talking about you again, but it's short term. It's a hollow victory. It's a cheap trick that does worse for the trust that your audience has in you in the long term.
Short-term
I mean,
gain.
If every new movie changes everything, why should I ever invest my trust in here in the first place? If the
God.
MCU is gonna survive, it needs to put in the work to fix its real problems. It needs to give us clear leadership. It needs programming that makes sense, and it needs to fulfill on the promises that it makes to us, its viewers. Will that be hard?
Arguably the
Sure,
most
but it'll
important
be
part of
far
the
more worth it
franchise.
in the long run than the short-term solution of just wiping the slate clean, starting it all from scratch. But hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And cut.
Oh God, yeah. I swear, superhero movies right now are such a mess. That's why I don't go to see movies that often. Like the last movie I saw, the last two actually, were obviously the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, as well as like Killers in the... I'm forgetting. It's the historical movie about like the Native Americans who had oil on their land, and you know, white man was killing them so they could have it. You know, with the whole thing with like Marvel like almost consistently sucking now, I look at it from two sides. One, I don't like that they're constantly failing, because, you know, I want them to succeed. I want there to be more good entertainment in the world. On the other side, I like seeing them fail, because then Disney is failing as a result as well. And I've been really annoyed with Disney just because of their constant live action remakes and stuff like that. Though granted, from what I've seen of Wish, that might be the first movie in a while where it seems like the evil villain is the evil villain. There's no like twist villain. There's no like evil twist villain or something like that. So Disney might be changing. They might try to be changing. So we're gonna have to see on that. But yeah, with all that out of the way, original video is linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will lead to my game theory reaction. And with all that out of the way, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.